Nice to see you all. I'm going to start with a poem out of this amazing collection from the Madrona Project. It is a collection of all written material and art about trees. And if you're into trees, this is a fine addition to your library. And you will recognize that my poem is not local, but it is true. It's called Eucalyptus. My father set the young eucalyptus trees in their 5-gallon cans along an unfenced line that divided our backyard from the neighbors. The 25 saplings were skinny, a little shaggy, and taller than my father, the cans heavy with soil and water as he adjusted their spacing. The ground was rough and weedy and sloped, unfriendly to shovel and knees, but over the weeks, the holes were dug and the trees settled on the hillside. I was 6 or 7 at the time, and my job was to snake the long hose down the hill to water the young trees. When the patio cracked down the middle, I had learned the word erosion, the trees now part of a bulwark to keep our house from sliding into the cemetery at the bottom of the hill. For a while, the trees were an attraction. Neighbors came to look, and guests were invited to admire the feathery boughs and my father's hard work. Though I never tired of collecting the woody nuts, the trees were messy in their habits, the least breeze loosing a shower of long, pungent leaves, bark, and branches. Some years, our neighbor Joaquin would come to the door to say his tortoise had wandered, and we would walk together down the railroad tie steps my father had placed near the trees. We searched, pulling aside a scruff of eucalyptus debris, and in due time would find a tortoise-sized excavation near the base of one tree or another, and inside it, the drowsing tortoise, who would be eased out and returned to her life of green lawns and fresh lettuce. When the trees and my father had reached a venerable age, he spoke of visiting the farm in Ohio, where he had lived for a while as a child. Some of the neighbors and their children and grandchildren still lived in the same houses, had never left, rooted to the place, like the maple trees his father had planted in the farm's yard. 2 people, he said, couldn't reach their arms around the massive trunks. Measured on the scale of his own life, nature's work seemed far more impressive than the achievements of his peers at the 50-year college reunion he attended on the same trip. He had planted trees, tended them, carved them with chisel and mallet, had respected their strength and vulnerability. They were reliable and unemotional as he strived to be. But after this trip, my father revisited the eucalyptus trees one by one, navigated the unsteady footing of the hillside, pressed his hands against their bark, their great girth, in a greeting of old friends who shared hard memories and laughter, who could admit their excesses and frailties, could see mirrored in each other's aging flesh their own astonishing beauty, ever-changing, generous, without vanity or greed or complaint. So this is a little change of direction, but it's from the same time, and this is actually a prose piece, and it is called Loquat. Below the retaining wall that held our back slope in place, my father leveled a narrow terrace where, at my mother's urging, he planted a trio of small trees. One was an exotic flowering shrub of some sort that never produced flowers. The second was an orange tree that burst into intoxicating bloom each year. Its fragrance would waft up the hill and into the house. The blossoms transformed themselves into fruit as round and green as peas and then fall off. It never yielded an orange larger than a hazelnut. Perhaps it was the slope or the soil or the oily fallout of the adjacent row of eucalyptus, but neither of the trees could deliver on their promise. With my mother standing at the edge of the patio offering suggestions from above, my father tried ministrations of every sort, to no avail. After that, each year, my mother invested all of her hope in the third tree, a loquat. This robust individual could do nothing but bear fruit. I was oblivious to its progress, but at some point my mother would start issuing daily instructions for me to descend the hill and check the loquats. This I did by giving the fruit a few little squeezes and bringing back a promising sample for her to examine. I'm not sure what she had in mind. She certainly never made jam, but these were labor-intensive fruits, about the size of a walnut, but pear-like in shape. They had tough, slightly furred skin, 3 or 4 or 5 large, slimy, glossy brown seeds, and in between the skin and the seeds, perhaps 1/8 of an inch of flesh that was an astringent cross between an apricot and a pear. At any rate, one day the sample I brought up would prove suitable, and my mother would set out a large basket for the next morning's harvest. There were hundreds of loquats on the tree. The following morning, as directed, I would carry the basket down the steps and across the terrace, and without fail, the tree would be stripped bare, the birds having arisen at dawn to confirm Dorothy's assessment of ripeness and not paused as I had for breakfast cereal. A scattering of seeds and shriveled, pecked fruits was all that remained. This scenario was repeated annually for perhaps 5 years until Dorothy gave up and the loquat tree became sort of a family shorthand for abundant riches that never quite made it to the bank.